Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to the Halal Advocacy Workshop, the State of Halal in the USA. My name is Ibrahim Nasser, and I'm the Business Development Officer at American Halal Institute, and I'll be the moderator for this event. First, I would like to thank you all for joining us. I hope you are all safe and well and are excited about the blessed month of Ramadan beginning in a couple days. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to let us witness this glorious month and to accept our prayers and fasting, inshallah. I'd like to give a special thanks to the supporting organizations, ICNA Relief and Polygon Education Fund, who both do wonderful work for the Muslim community. I'll post links to their websites in the chat box below, so you can check out for yourselves the truly amazing work they're doing. And if you're able, please donate to their organizations to assist them with their efforts. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. First, throughout all of the speakers, you can send your questions through the chat box located either at the bottom or towards the right of your screens. And as the questions begin to roll in, we will do our best to answer them during the webinar, but we will be also holding a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. So even if your questions you're not going to answer right away, be sure to stick around until the end for that session. Next, we will also be administering a survey at the end of the webinar, just to get some feedback from the audience to kind of gauge where we can improve and how we can, deliver the best webinars for you all. I'll post a link to the chat box following the Q&A session for that survey. And lastly, there will be several polls posted throughout each of our speakers' presentations. They should only take a few seconds to answer, and they're more so to help our presenters kind of measure where the audience currently stands. So let's get into it. The reason we're all here for this webinar is that we, as a Muslim community, can all acknowledge the fact that there is a clear lack of accessibility to halal foods and services for Muslims living in America. I'm sure we've all encountered instances where we've had to restrain ourselves from consuming foods in public due to the questionability of halal food options. Whether we're out with friends or our children are at their schools eating lunches, or we're walking down the aisles of a grocery chain, we all notice the scarcity of halal food options. So what we're left with, or where many Muslims currently stand, is that we strictly limit when and where we purchase our food. And plain and simple, we believe that the Muslim Americans deserve better than that. One of our top priorities at American Halal Institute has been halal inclusivity. And what I mean by that is we want every Muslim in America to have sufficient access to halal foods and services. So the question becomes, how do we go about accomplishing that? Well, it's certainly not going to be an easy feat. It's going to require a collective effort from the Muslim community, banding together to showcase that we are serious about this matter, that we want halal foods readily available and easily accessible. What it's going to require is a strong advocative effort from the entire community. So in this webinar, we'll cover some of the past halal legislation that has been implemented throughout the country, and specifically in Illinois. And we'll also discuss how the legislative process works and how we can bring halal to the table when legislation is being discussed. We will also cover where we see the future for halal legislation and how the outlook for that will be presented to us. We will also touch upon the importance of halal promotion on the local and the federal levels, and discuss what we could do in the community to bring halal to the forefront. Then after that, we'll get into some advocacy work done in halal in the past few months to show you some concrete examples of what we can do in the community and the results that we could see from that. And lastly, and you're definitely not going to want to miss this part, is that we'll have a modified version of the Congressional Advocacy 101 training administered by Polygon Education Fund, where we'll learn the tangible actions that we can do to actually witness change in legislation. They'll present us with an overview of Congress and the advocacy process and explain to us how to participate in town halls, office visits, phone calls, and pretty much any way for us to get our voices heard. I can't emphasize this enough, but this is an extremely beneficial training, and we are very fortunate for the opportunity to receive it. So make sure you don't miss it and stick around to the end for that. It's meant to give you the tools that you need to begin to see changes in halal legislation. So now let's have our first speaker turn on their video, Brother Salah Ubaidullah. So I'll give a brief introduction to him while he's getting his video situated. Brother Salah Ubaidullah, he is the president of American Halal Institute and the executive director of NATE, the North American Islamic Trust. And he's going to give us a brief introduction to halal, the definition, what it entails, So please, Brother Salah, the floor is yours.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Alaikum salam, Brother Salah.
وعليكم السلام جميعا. Halal is in a very simple word, is permissible, meaning what is a Muslim permitted to eat and acquire or use in his daily life. And of course, to make sure that a product is halal is sometimes could be a tedious process, but we try to simplify it and make it easy for people to become halal certified or halal eligible. My main concern today, I wanted just to talk about AHI. AHI is really a division of a North American Islamic Trust, which is NATE. NATE is basically the largest Waqf organization in North America. We have always tried to see the need of the the Muslim community here in America and try to fulfill that need. We had done that through the trust aspect of it back in the 70s and 80s, and we continue to do so. And then we did that in the 80s and 90s by providing Islamic books and translation of Islamic books to make it available for the Muslim community when it was absolutely needed and nobody was fulfilling that need. We also, realized that people also needed to invest the funds or money in a halal manner, and that's when we introduced Amana Mutual Fund, and then we followed that with Iman Mutual Fund in order to make sure that the Muslim has an option of at least growing his funds and investing his funds in a halal manner. So it's really a natural progression or a natural extension for us to be involved in the halal products, because we see there is an absolute need for the Muslim community to have halal products, whether as Brother Ibrahim said, in the school for children who are at lunchtime, they would have to start looking for items that they can eat. And the concern that parents would actually have to make sure that their kids would not be eating something that is haram. So it is a challenge for a Muslim. And also when you go shopping, it's very difficult to find halal products. So we are trying to change that scenario by advocating that's why we established AHI, American Halal Institute. The main functions or the main mission of AHI is to basically advocacy in the sense that we want to promote halal products and services by extenuating the need and soliciting public and official support for the availability of halal products and services. This is a process that requires the involvement of Muslims, pressuring the likes of Costco and the likes of larger chains to make sure that they provide the kind of products for us. And of course, it requires certain Muslims, activists, to reach out to those organizations to promote halal products. And not only that, not only for the benefit of the Muslims, but also for the benefit of those organizations that would be providing that kind of those products, and thus increasing their revenues in the process. We also want to educate and train people of what is halal, and to make sure that there are enough people who can actually understand what halal is and what it entails, and how to make sure that a halal product is halal. There's the expression that it's from the farm to the fork, meaning that we have to make sure that in order for an item to be halal, from the very beginning of the source all the way till it gets to the table, it is a halal. So it means that when we're talking about meat, we want to make sure that it's not that non-halal meat is not shared in the same facility with halal meat, that it's transported also separately or isolated in the transportation process, that it's handled differently, that when it makes it to the cutting board, it's cut in a halal environment. So that it's a process that has to be that people have to pay attention to it, whether in the manufacturing side or on the distribution side and even on the retail side. So we want to make sure that people understand how to maintain the halal ecosystem correctly. Of course, in order for halal to be, like even when you go and say, people say, this is a halal item, the Muslim consumer is concerned about whether is it really truly halal. So we want to make sure that we try to develop standards for what halal is, at least an acceptable standards for the Muslim community here in the US. And then we want to make sure that there are certifying organizations, including ours, including AHI, that would follow those guidelines. And then, when an item is actually stamped as halal, that the Muslim consumer would believe that it's truly halal, and he doesn't have to question it and say, oh, no, maybe it's not halal, maybe not. All of those issues have to be resolved in order for halal to become an acceptable, or at least a halal certification to become an acceptable form of assurance. We, of course, simplifying the certification process would be worthwhile for those who produce it and those who provide it. And to also make sure that if we make the halal products and services readily available to Muslims, and competition thus increases, that usually will reduce the cost of halal products. Nowadays, I mean, if you go and buy a halal chicken or halal meat or whatever, usually you'd have to pay a premium of 30 to 40%, sometimes even as much as 100%. So what happens is that we if there's an availability and there is competition, most likely the Muslim consumer would benefit out of this competition through reduced prices. That's basically our mission, is to make sure that halal is available, that halal is reasonably priced, that people are assured that when an item is labeled as halal, it is truly halal. And we can talk about halal issues, hopefully, and halal, how to make sure that an item is halal. That would probably require another workshop. But for now, I think this is, I will stop right over here. Should there be questions later on, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Brother Salah. And now, next up, and I'm very excited about this, we have Nia Odioti Hassan. I call her Auntie Nia here to talk about some halal legislation. Auntie Nia is a retired senior policy and budget staffer for the Office of Illinois State Senate President. She is a board member of Iman, a board member of the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, and a recipient of the CIOGC Community Award. She was also a faculty member at Luther College for several years. So without further ado, Auntie Nia, the floor is yours. Auntie Nia, are you there?
Yes, I'm trying to, oh, here it is. Okay.
There we go.
Assalamu alaikum to everybody. I'm glad that I see so many people on the webinar today. In 2001, Illinois became the first state in the union to address the issue of halal food by enacting a bill, Senate Bill 750, Public Act 92-394. So if you wanted to look that up, that's what you would do. You would go to the Illinois General Assembly and you would go to 2001 and you would put in the bill, Senate Bill 750, and it would give you all the information that you needed to know. But basically it creates the Halal Food Act. And let me tell you how this got started. The Illinois Senate at that time was controlled by the Republicans, and a moderate Republican, nothing like what we see today, represented the area where there was mostly Muslims. That kind of changed after we did redistricting in 2010. But she was a very moderate, and she came to a group called United Muslim American Association. They don't even exist anymore, came to her with the bill. And she said to them, I would be glad to to sponsor this bill because I don't have any Muslims on my staff, but I have a very good friend on the opposite staff, and she will help me guide this bill through the General Assembly. So this is the first time that anything like this happened where opposite staffer was guiding opposite member with a bill. So we had the bill that we did a lot of work on the bill. The bill was sponsored by her in the Senate, and then in the House, the sponsor of the bill went on to be the Cook County Sheriff, which is Chicago's in Cook County, and he's the Cook County Sheriff. Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart was the sponsor of the bill in the House. The bill passed in the House 113 to 0. There are 118 members of the House, and it passed the Senate 57 to 0. And there are 59 members. So you can see that we had it was a victory. And one of the people that all of you, whether you live in Illinois or not, would know as one of the chief sponsors of the bill was State Senator then Barack Obama, who went on to be, as we know, the first Black president in the United States. And I got him to get on the bill because I was his staffer for health care. And so we did a lot he did a lot of things for Muslims, when he was a state senator. At any rate, the bill needs amending. And I've told the Muslim community that, it needs to be amended because it needs to be tougher penalties in there, and there needs to be some update of the language. So I'll be working with the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago and the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition in updating that bill. So I know my nephew there also asked me to talk about some other things that happen in Illinois, because Illinois is really unique. We have over 500,000 Muslims basically in Chicago and the surrounding, and about 300 masjids in Illinois, and they're very, very active civically. In fact, I got invited that year. The organization doesn't even exist anymore. It's called the American Muslim Council, and they had their national convention in Washington, D.C. And they asked the brother who was the president of UMA at that time, they asked him to have me to come with him to DC and discuss this bill, because all the other states was asking, how can we do this bill? She needs to come and talk to us. So I went to that conference, and we learned a lot. And so some other states after that started doing halal food bills modeled after Illinois. But I want to tell you what the halal food bill in Illinois led to, what other things it led to for Muslims in Illinois. And this probably can, and by the way, this was the first time that the Muslim community had interacted with the Illinois General Assembly and vice versa, because for the whole 36 years that I worked on staff, I retired in 2017. As far as I know, and it's been verified, I was the only Muslim on all four staffs. So, right. And by the way, if you have some young people that are interested in legislative politics, we have a program here that they reach out to Muslims to be legislative staffers. So contact me, and you can come from all over the country. It's not just, it's just based in Illinois, but people come from all over the country. But one of the things that this led to was Illinois Muslim Action Day in 2009. So it took us 2001 for the bill. 8 years later, we got Illinois Muslim Action Day. And the reason why we decided to do that, and it's sponsored now by the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. I went with them and I said, if we could get like a gallery full of Muslims down here in 2 hours, and that's what happened with the halal food bill, to sit in the gallery and listen to President Bill. I said, what would you think if we just be organized? So since 2009, we have been doing Illinois Muslim Action Day in Illinois. We didn't have it last year, of course, and we didn't have it this year. And they never thought about doing it virtually. So I told them, if we're still in this crisis next year, to do it virtually. One of the things that, because I'm about the young people, y'all young people, and I'm about promoting them and making sure that they're going to remain in this country. Their parents might go back to the old country, that they are doing the things that they are supposed to do. So one of the outgrowths of the Illinois Muslim Action Day is something called the Senate page program for Muslims, and it's always on Illinois Muslim Action Day. And one of the good things about this is our young people are paired with members of the state Senate, and those members have been very helpful to them when they graduated from high school, go to college, to help them get scholarships, and also to write recommendations and those things for them. Then 2 years later, in 2011, again, I want to show all this was because of halal food bill. So that's why I'm talking about these other things that happened because of halal food bill. So in 2011, on August 30th, to be specific, which was Eid, the governor of Illinois at that time, who was a governor by the name of Pat Quinn, you can look him up on internet, announced at Eid celebration that he was establishing what's called a Muslim American Advisory Committee to the governor, which he did. And we got a lot of legislation. There was a legislative committee with that group, and we got a lot of legislation out of there, and we're still getting legislation, even though they pretty much have dissolved. Because let me tell you what happened. The governor that was all pro-Muslims, and by the way, he used to have iftars at the mansion. He also, on Illinois Muslim Action Day, he would have a breakfast at the mansion where everybody that was participating in that would come to the mansion. And so he was running for a third term, and he was defeated by a Republican. So this Republican came in, and he was like, we called him a Trump 2.2, okay? He came in and he refused to recognize the Muslim American Advisory Committee. He could have kept it, if he wanted to. He told them they couldn't hold meetings anymore or whatever. And make a long story short, what was done later, we said, we better codify this, so if any other governor comes in, this still exists. So we did a bill to codify this group. And it passed the Senate, but it didn't pass the House because it got to the House, and a group of right-wingers in Illinois started questioning why did there need to be an advisory committee for Muslims? Is there advisory committee on any other religion or whatever? Why does it have to be Muslims? Okay, so the bill, and by the way, the bill is going to be reintroduced next year. So I mean, we're not done with that. We're going to try to get that advisory committee back. We do have a Democratic governor now that is pro-Jewish, by the way, who's pro-Muslim, the pro-Muslim community, and has Muslims working for him. So and finally, in a couple of years ago, and I'm a founding board member. We have something in Illinois now called the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. In fact, we just had a meeting last night, and they're working now with redistricting, trying to make sure that because we have no Muslims in the Illinois General Assembly, but we could after this census. And so they're working with the state legislature to make sure that we can get a district for Muslim. But until that happens, Muslims are pretty much represented by African American politicians who have carried out legislation and stuff when it was not fashionable to do it, and took a lot of hate mail and everything else when Trump got in about us. So I'm not going to tie up everything. That's all I want to say now. And if anybody has any, I'll stick around, of course. And anybody has any questions afterwards, I'll be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Antonia. But before you go, one question came up, and I think it's a good point that I think you might be able to address right now, if that's okay.
By the way, I'll be staying.
Perfect. That's great to
Yes.
hear. Thank you very much for that. She had somewhere to run, but she changed up her schedule for us to make sure she was here. So a big thank you to Antonia for us. But the question was, Could similar codification can it not take place on the federal level, or is the state level really the only answer?
Yeah, I think it would only happen on state level.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, one of the things that we did is that we used the halal food bill as a teaching tool for the state to learn about Muslims. And my nephew, you saw the video that the General Assembly did honoring me when I retired. And one of the things the member said is that she taught us Islam. We didn't know anything about Islam until she came on staff, and now we are very supportive of the Muslim community. So no, the federal level will not work with anything like this. It's got to be done by the states.
Okay. And there's another one. How do we go about the? I'm just because you're right here with us. I just want people to while they have it fresh on their minds. But people are saying there's essentially no enforcement of the halal bill. What kind of efforts can we make to ensure that the bill is actually being followed and it's in accordance with everything that it's intended to be used for?
You're right. You're right about that, and that's why I said it hasn't been updated, since 2001. And I keep telling people that, the stakeholders or whatever, because we had to there was some enforcement in it, but not as much. And I want to tell my brothers and sisters that one of the real reasons that we had to do a halal food bill in Illinois is because we have a lot of corner stores, as we call them, in communities here. And they sell food that they tell us is halal, especially meat, right next to pork, because they're in a community where there's some Muslims, but not enough Muslims. And so I know Iman, Inner City Muslim Action Network, which I've been on their board for 15 years, we tell them, we have what's called a corner store program. And we tell them, that we get calls asking us, why are you all selling pork? And we know that Muslims don't eat pork. Because in the African American community where most of these stores are listed, even some of the Christians don't eat pork. So we've had to answer that, to them. And as many of because this came back up again, you didn't hear it, but I got to hear it out here, is that the store that George Floyd was in was a Muslim-run store that was doing pork. I know some pork and was doing pork there and everything. And the community in Minneapolis asked Brother Rami to come over and talk to them about that, and he did. So I think we'll see some changes in the Muslim community in Minneapolis. But no, we got to enforce it, And like I said, the problem in Illinois, it was Muslims who were causing the problems.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Antonia. Your wealth of information it's invaluable for us, and your history and experience working in the Illinois State Senate. Your impact is still being felt today. I just walked into how I came across the Halal Act. The first time I interacted with it or became aware of it was, I walked into an Arabic restaurant and I noticed the act displayed upon their window. I was like, oh, what's this? Did some research into it and found out the Halal Act was actually passed in 2001. I wasn't even aware about that. So thank you very much, Antonia. And if you guys have any more questions for her, she said she's going to stick around to the end. Just make sure you get them in now in the chat box or by email, and we'll get those answered for you. So thank you very much, Antonia. Have a great day. And now we'd like to keep the ball rolling with our next presenter. So next up, and we're very fortunate for this, we have Brother Ammar Ahmed, the Public Relations Coordinator for ICNU Relief. And he's going to explain to us the importance of halal promotion on both the local and the federal levels. Brother Ammar, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam, bro.
Ibrahim, can you give me permission to show my video, inshallah? So as Brother Ibrahim mentioned, I work for ICNU Relief, the Islamic Circle of North America. We're a domestic human needs organization, alhamdulillah, with over 50-odd something food pantries across 13 states. And what we try to do on a on a local level, on a state level, on a federal level, is to push for halal food access for our Muslim beneficiaries, our Muslim clients. But before I talk about that, I want to take a step back. And I want to say Jazakallah khair to Auntie Nia, because I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants speaking before you. And I honestly feel embarrassed after speaking after Auntie Nia, because I don't have that wealth of information, mashallah, or the accolades or credentials that she has. So I truly want to appreciate her for everything that she's done for the Muslim community, and for Muslim Americans like myself, who call this place home, who aren't going back home, like she aptly mentioned. And I want to speak to some of the things that folks are commenting in the chat box, and it's great to see this level of participation. I think one word we have to keep in mind is the word democracy. When we look at the word democracy, it's a word, it comes from the Greek language, and it's two parts. The demos is the first part of that word, and krasi is the second part. And demos means people, and the second, people, and krasi means rule. People's rule, or the rule of the people. Now, America is a democracy. It's a representative democracy. And we go to the ballot box and we elect our representatives to make laws on our behalf. And sometimes our community feels like our voice isn't heard. And we're not the only community that feels our voice isn't heard. When we look at the built world around us, I want to talk about sidewalks for a moment. When we look at a sidewalk, for all my civil engineers on the call, all the architects, so a sidewalk isn't flat. It isn't a straight line. A sidewalk has something called a curb cut, right? Where it's easy to roll a stroller onto. It provides a higher level of accessibility. When we go to a grocery store, we see disabled parking, specific spots designated where you need to have a plaque or a sticker to park there. We see that public spaces, parks, libraries, schools, masajid need to have a ramp there to be handicap accessible. Those things that I just mentioned they didn't happen overnight. Disabled activists, community activists got together and pushed legislation. The legislation that I talked about, the changes I talked about of parking spots and of ramps culminated in 1990, so not too long ago, with the American Disability Act, the ADA, right? And businesses are required to be ADA compliant. This group, right, also a minority in America, also not a lot of political weight, and most of the time forgotten and overshadowed, unheard. But they kept on pushing their message over and over and over again. The movement started in the 1960s to push for higher access for folks with disability. It took them 30 years to get through a piece of legislation, and that piece of legislation finally culminated in these big changes, which made public spaces like schools and libraries more accessible and made private businesses accountable to make sure that they had accommodations for folks with disability. Why do I mention this before speaking about halal? Is because we, like the disabled community, are a minority community within the United States. And we have to keep on raising our voice, like Auntie Nia said. We have to keep coming back to the table over and over and over again. But the first step in this representative democracy is that we need just to open our mouth and ask. I had a meeting last week with the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA. It's probably a symbol that you've seen on products. Something is labeled USDA organic. And I said, how do we increase halal food for our children in schools? And I thought this was some kind of high level federal policy change that needs to be required to be trickled down to states and localities. She simply said that you need the parents to ask on a school level. So they need to reach out to the school principal, to the food handler, the food manager that runs the school kitchen. That they possibly have a district-wide nutritionist to let them know that you have Muslim students in your school district, you have pockets of Muslim populations in these specific high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, and what accommodations can the school district make. And she gave the example of students with nut allergies or with any specific type of allergy, and how the school will make accommodations for children with nut allergies. But the first thing you need to do is just ask, reach out to the school administrative staff, reach out to the decision makers and say, hey, we have so and so number of Muslims. What can you do to help accommodate our needs? And I think that was such an eye-opening thing for me specifically, because I thought like so many things need to be changed. But the first step, she just told me, was to see what they could do for you on a local level. Because on a federal policy standpoint, most of what the USDA is doing for school meals is just providing reimbursements. A lot of the decision making is happening on a local level. And so I just want to give that piece of example. And the second example that I want to give, and Johanna is going to talk more about how to do that advocacy, but the kind of the second example I want to give is around halal meals for food pantries, right? So ICNA Relief is working on this issue, and we are lobbying on the issue, or not lobbying, I should say, better so advocating around this issue. And inshallah, we definitely need your help. And I'm going to ask Ibrahim, once we develop some fact sheets and whatnot, to disseminate that information and move that information across. I know Brother Mahmoud is talking about certification. There are a lot of local certifying bodies, and this is not my realm of expertise or area of work. So I'm definitely going to point those questions back to Brother Saleh and Brother Ibrahim. I know that shayukh and imams are working on this issue. I know in New York, they have a local certifying body. Chicago, for example, Imam Hamza Maqbool has been pretty keen on this issue. So we also need to, inshallah, encourage our imams, encourage ourselves, become more well-versed in what is halal, what is haram, what is proper food handling, so we can help these schools, right? We can provide the resources to let them know what this looks like. So the first step is having that conversation, what halal accommodations can be made. And the second step is, what can we do to help the school make those halal accommodations, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. I really appreciate so many people attending this webinar, and inshallah, we can bring about some really positive changes just by asking and getting the conversation started. And inshallah, we will be putting out more and more information around this issue. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much for that, Brother Ammar. Thank you for the in-depth presentation. I really love the way you frame your perspective, and appreciate I appreciate the emphasis on why we need to raise our voices as a community, not just on the individual level, but we all need to do it as a collective. We all know that we're not going to be given something if we don't ask for it. That's just not the way it works. And if we begin amplifying our voices, our chances of having halal become accessible will only begin to increase. It starts with us. And yes, we will be putting together fact sheets that contain some of the information that Brother Ammar and Antonia has discussed with you guys, and we'll be sending that out to everybody following the completion of the webinar, so you can kind of take that with you and hold on to that, and continue to spread the message throughout all the other Muslims in the community.
Inshallah. And Ibrahim, I just want to make one point, sorry, that when I gave the example of the ramps and the sidewalks, disabled people aren't the only one benefiting from it. You see moms, right? My sister, mashallah, has little ones. She has a stroller. So it definitely makes it easier to navigate the neighborhood. It makes it easier to navigate grocery stores because of these compliances. So we've seen, inshallah, and we'll see this with halal as well, as folks have access to halal meat, that the Muslim community won't be the only community benefiting, but it's the way that we provide perspectives and frames when we are discussing these issues, inshallah, that we should also keep in mind.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. The benefits of halal, it's the religious requirement. That's one aspect of it, but it's also it's the healthiest way to prepare the meat. It's the cleanliness process. It's done with the most attention to detail. So the actual food that goes through the halal certification process is actually the best product, not just for Muslims, but for the whole entire country and entire population. So thank you for that, Brother Ammar. I appreciate your time, and please check out ICNA Relief. I believe the website is icnarelief.org. Am I correct on that, Ammar? Okay, perfect. So icnarelief.org, check them out, and they do wonderful work for the community. And thank you. So next up, we have Brother Shakir Sayed, who served as a founding executive director of the Islamic Shura Council of Southern California, and is currently offering his expertise for American Halal Institute. And he's going to be discussing some of the halal advocacy work that has been done in the past and some of the results that have come from it. So Brother Shakir, the floor is yours.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Ibrahim, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone.
I see that your video is working now. We're all good?
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay.
Alhamdulillah. I also echo Ammar's sentiment in paying our deepest respects to Sister Nia and people like her on whose shoulders we stand in building the Muslim infrastructure in the United States. With that said, my brief talk is going to present or share with you a case study, so to speak, which is very recent. Over the last year or so, we all have been subjected by this challenge of pandemic. And the USDA, Department of Agriculture, who oversees food security of people living in the United States, reached out to community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, human relief agencies, and so on, using their networks to distribute food to people across the country. As a consequence, many masajid, many Muslim relief agencies received truckloads and pallets of food boxes to be distributed to the community at large. And as this program grew, the community members began to benefit from it, and some were concerned. One of the primary and major concern for many, many people that trickled down in the community over the course of time is that some of the food packages included non-halal or haram products, ingredients in the food. So they began asking the Muslim leadership in their respective localities, what do we do? Do we use them? Do we throw them? Do we give it to somebody else? And so on. And when these questions were raised, I think sufficiently, it reached to us, and AHI took it upon itself that, look, this could not be an intentional act on behalf of the USDA to be doing so, but it is just simply they don't know. And we took the initiative and reached out to USDA, assuming that maybe they will respond, maybe they will not. I mean, it's a huge government agency which oversees many different aspects. And this may just fall through the cracks, so to speak. So earlier this year, in January, February timeframe, we wrote to USDA echoing the sentiment that was already raised by one of the senators from New York, Kristen Gillibrand, who expressed her concern about the insensitivity for particular ethnic communities, such as Muslims, such as Jewish community, such as Hindus, who many of whom don't eat meat at all, is not being addressed duly by the USDA. And we wrote this memo in February, and we started contacting various masajid and community organizations to also see that if and whether or not they too have encountered this. And sure enough, more than many masajid and relief agencies confirmed that yes, the emergency food packages that are being provided by the USDA are not quote unquote, in compliance with our religious needs. And not just us, but also our cousins in the Jewish community whose dietary laws and regulations are very similar to ours. So we wrote this memo to USDA, and we were pleasantly surprised that in less than a month, the secretary of USDA responded to us. And I think it is best if I show this memo to all of you. Let me see if I can share the screen here. Just to echo the same conversation that was addressed by previous speakers, as all it takes is simply taking the initiative at our level, at our individual level. You know, as Brother Ammar had mentioned, that, you know, parents asking the school for halal meals for their children, they most likely will not be able to, but they will ramp it up to their school district office, who will take it to the county, who will take it to the state, and so on. Here's a memo that we received back from USDA. And I'm elated by the answer. What did the answer say? It says that throughout the development and launch of this federal emergency food program, USDA has requested that contractors work with local suppliers to customize the contents of the box to meet unique cultural needs. And then they say their program is currently under review to determine changes that can be incorporated to improve the program going forward. As part of this process, USDA says that we are taking feedback from our stakeholders, that is you and I essentially, right? And they will certainly take into consideration the unique needs of the Jewish and the Muslim communities. So this tells us that it is not really that difficult to initiate a conversation with the agencies whom we interact at the county level, at the state level, and at the federal level. Organizations like American Halal Institute can play a role definitely at the state and the federal level, which we are doing. But we, the Muslim collective, can do the same at our personal, at our local municipality level, which then trickles up. And it, as you know, as the saying goes, it takes a village. All of us, activists, advocates, faith leaders, community leaders, parents, young folks, need to be doing this. And American Halal Institute is deeply committed to really accelerate this conversation in making the idea of halal as a healthy choice, not just for Muslims, but for all people, because of what all it takes to produce halal products and food. It is extremely important for those of my brothers and sisters who are really watching this program, those who have children. I would highly, highly encourage you to begin this conversation, not in terms of complaining, not in terms of protesting, but rather simply asking, in the context of educating those who we interact with in our schools, in our colleges, in our universities, for halal food. And when you have those conversations, we would love to hear back from you as to what your conversation was like, what was the response. And those of us who are situated in this position to really begin the advocacy at the federal level, and which then, inshallah, will trickle down to the state and the county level and the city level also, right? So it will take some time for us, 10, 15, 20 years maybe. There are halal certifying agencies, a handful few in the country. Overwhelming majority of the mainstream markets, mainstream stores, they say that they have halal food, or none of us ask, where did you certify? Who certifies it? Where do you store your products, and so on and so forth. So even the halal certifying agency are not at a capacity where, after issuing certification for for halal. They may not necessarily have the wherewithal and the capacity to continue to audit and make sure that their certification is in place. So there's a whole lot of advocacy work that needs to be done, and it will require all of us, frankly, to participate to the best that we possibly can, inshallah. So I'm deeply grateful to those communities throughout the country who alerted us and flagged us that the federal food program is not, quote unquote, fully halal compliant. And then we were able to then have this conversation with USDA. And now we are engaged with USDA to ensure post-COVID, any such program that will go out, which essentially is going to schools and prisons and all in public sector, we will continue to liaise and coordinate with the USDA, inshallah, and we will keep you all abreast and posted of the progress or lack thereof. But in the meantime, do please have these conversations in your respective cities with folks you interact with in the public sector particularly, because all of that matters, and it will help agencies like us to really advance this conversation about providing halal food to our fellow Muslims and also to the society at large as a healthy choice. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much for that great presentation, Brother Shakian. It's really reassuring to know that we do see results from the advocative efforts that are being done, and it's not just for nothing. It gives us confidence to continue the fight on our end. And I would also just like to echo that sentiment of that you all in your communities should be should be talking to your representatives, should be reaching out, should be asking for halal accessibility, because it gives us our confidence and our support to go and continue and talk to these different federal agencies and these governmental agencies, and it gives us, that it shows them that the evidence that the Muslim community actually does want and actually does need and demand that halal become accessible for all. So thank you very much for that, Brother Shakian. And he'll be around for questions and answers at the end. So please continue to get those in through the chat box, and we will get to those following this next part. So now, last but certainly not least, we have Johanna Mustafa from Polygon Education Fund to present the modified version of the Congressional Advocacy Training. Johanna has a passion for civil rights work and brings years of experience in national and grassroots advocacy and organizing work. She is the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Polygon, where she develops and executes advocacy strategies in support of Polygon's policy agenda. And prior to joining Polygon, she served as an advocacy specialist for the National Network of Arab American Communities. I'm very excited for this because I haven't been through the training yet myself, so I'm ready to learn a lot right now in the next 20-25 minutes. So please help me welcome Johanna Mustafa. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I am honored to share space with all of you. Let me share my screen and get started with our training. All right. Can you all see my my screen? Is everything okay? I'm going to assume.
See it.
All right, wonderful. So thank you all. Assalamu alaikum. I'm very happy to be joining you today and sharing space with you for such an important event. Mashallah, there's a wealth of knowledge on this call from leaders who have been spearheading the work for years. And I'm so proud to see our American Muslim community coming together and organizing for halal inclusivity. It seems like a lot of folks on this call already have a passion for advocacy and already recognize the importance of the work. So I was asked to give a brief modified version of our Advocacy 101 training, just kind of as a refresher for those who are experts, but also a guide for those who are starting their journey in advocacy, and a tool for all community members, because we can all take action, not just policy experts. So I would like to start by speaking a little bit about the different sources of influence. It's really important to think about how money in politics is not the only factor influencing governance and policy. And I think a lot of times even experts forget that. So in addition to special interest groups such as lobbyists and big donors, our elected officials are also influenced by other party leaders and colleagues, media, and of course, electoral prospects, because most elected officials want re-election. So just, before we get started in talking about the different tips and avenues and tools that we can use as advocates, I think just to keep that in mind and think about all the different power dynamics that come with it. And so with that being said, I would like to highlight that as constituents, our work is very, very crucial and very important. We really do have the power to put and keep elected officials in office. At the end of the day, they are public servants that work for us. And so in order to ensure such meaningful and reflective representation on all levels of government and on all issues, not just halal inclusivity, we must utilize and seek to master the tools and avenues at our disposal. I would also like to share a couple of brief statistics before I delve into the tips, just to show that if you ever doubt your role as a constituent, whether you're joining us live or here on the Zoom call, even experts, sometimes we get burnt out and we question the system sometimes. I want you to reconsider the lens from which you are looking at this work. So as someone who has worked in a congressional office and was on the other side of the phone, taking constituent calls and listening to their demands and concerns, I really want to uplift and assure you that your efforts are never a waste. And as you can see here, the Congressional Management Foundation reports that direct constituent interactions have more influence on lawmakers' decisions than other strategies. So don't let lobbyists and big donors intimidate you. I also will be sharing just one more, a couple more statistics showing how 94% of staffers also believe that constituent advocacy impacts undecided lawmakers, which is another great point to keep in mind whenever we're looking to move issues within Congress or any other institution, really, is that sometimes we have the ability to move undecided or, neutral lawmakers who may not be fully on our side yet. It's also good to note that 79% of staffers also believe personal stories help shape legislators' opinions and eventually their vote and their action on a specific piece of legislation. And I've heard this throughout the webinar today as well, is that, we need to make the ask, we need to represent our narrative, our stories. And we'll talk about this a little bit a little bit more in just a few minutes. So now I want to use the legislative branch, Congress, as an example to speak about how we interact and engage in advocacy efforts. I also want to point out, like Ammar said, that, and others on this call, is that a lot of the advocacy efforts on this specific issue and all other issues impacting our community are also local and state level efforts. So with that in mind, everything that I will be presenting, think of it as a science that you can apply to all levels of government. But for the sake of convenience, since we're all familiar with Congress, I believe, I will be using that as an example. All right, so first thing to think about before you even make that first contact with your elected official is to know the policymaking process. I think especially for constituents, this may seem a little bit intimidating, not knowing how policy even passes in Congress, or how it moves forward on a local and state level even. So just do your research. For Congress, as you can see, the bill is introduced in either chamber. It is then sent to a committee, then goes for a floor vote, and then both chambers combine the policy, and then hopefully it will make it to the president's table and goes into law. So that's like a very simplified version of how policy works on a federal level. I won't be delving into too much detail, but just wanted to point out that before you even engage with any elected official, it's important to know how how policymaking works. And then in addition to that, it's also important to be aware of not only the elected officials' role in policymaking, but also how other people around the elected official interact with that individual. So if we're speaking about Congress, it would be good to have an idea of the congressional office and the hierarchy and bureaucracy of how things move in that one specific office. So if you're trying to reach, let's say, your representative in the House, many times you will probably be making an ask of, or communicating with a staff assistant or an intern, especially for an initial call, and especially if you're a constituent. It's also not always very realistic to schedule a office visit or a call with your member of Congress. So just to keep in mind that regardless of who you speak to at a congressional office, let's say you start with an intern, it will go to the staff assistant, they'll make a note of it. It will then go to the legislative director or whatever staffer is working on that specific issue, who oftentimes actually has more knowledge on the issue than the Congress member. And then it will move forward to the chief of staff and Congress member. And if for some reason you do have the connections to get a meeting with the member of Congress, or if the member of Congress has the time and is able to meet with you and the allies and the community members, at the end of the day, all that knowledge that you communicate with the member of Congress will also go back to the staffers, who will essentially be doing a lot of the workload and the research on policy and interacting with the committee and the constituents, because at the end of the day, they are the experts on that specific issue. So just wanted to flag that and put it out there. Don't be intimidated, by all the different staffers that you're engaging with and feel like your message is not being reflected or received, because they will definitely make a note of it. And so now that we've kind of addressed, I would say, the general reminders to keep in mind, I want to go over a couple of tips and guidelines in terms of how to contact your member of Congress. And again, I also want to highlight that we are speaking about Congress right now, but a lot of these also apply for local and state level offices as well. For House and Senate, you can easily find your members on the House website and the Senate website. If you are looking for an elected official on a more local or state level, the state and local websites are also very helpful. So let's say if you're looking for a school board member, you can easily find everyone on board if you just Google the school district. Same goes for city council and all other state elected officials as well. For Congress, you can also easily call them at the number shown on the slide. This is more of a directory or like an operator that basically takes you to the specific office that you're looking for. So you can call them, they'll ask you if you're calling for the House or the Senate, and then take you to that specific office. Once you get on that call, it's very, very important to identify yourself. So if you're a policy expert or calling from a specific organization, it's very important to flag that as soon as you get on that call. If you're a constituent, then that's even better. And it's also very important to make sure that they know they're speaking to you as a constituent, because they will immediately make a note of every single thing that you say. It's also very important to prepare a script. And I say that because it's important to keep it short, one issue per email or call, and explain why the issue is important to you. Think about how folks have very short time spans. And so you really want to make that elevator pitch in 1 minute, no more than 1 minute. Otherwise, you will lose the person that you're talking to. And while you're talking about the issue, don't forget to make a very, very clear ask. Not only should you make a clear ask, but also a feasible or a feasible ask that identifies an existing problem or an existing bill. For instance, if you're calling Congress and you already know there's a bill going up for markup in a committee or going to the floor for a vote, then you can simply mention that bill and say, would the member of Congress or would Representative X vote yes on the specific bill? So just keep it as simple as possible, because you should keep in mind that they're receiving a lot of different calls on many, many issues, especially if we're speaking about the federal level. And so I kind of drafted a very simple script for what that looks like. If you are calling, let's, for the sake of this webinar, pretend that there's a bill in Congress called Food Justice in Schools Act. So you would call and mention your name, mention that you're a constituent. I'm calling you to vote yes on the Food Justice in Schools Act. Every Muslim child should have affordable access to halal foods, including school meals. Unfortunately, many Muslim kids don't eat in schools due to lack of halal options, leaving kids hungry. So in a very short paragraph, you made an ask, you identified the problem, and you gave a solution in only 2 to 3 sentences. And then again, reiterate what you're asking for. I urge Representative X to speak for the Food Justice in Schools Act. Will the representative do so? I forgot to include it here in my draft, but it's also very helpful to always ask a question at the end. This will require a response most of the time. So you can get that immediate follow-up. The staffer will tell you yes or no, or say, you know what, the member of Congress is undecided right now. Getting that piece of information is very important because it then helps you mobilize around that issue. If you know your member of Congress is already voting yes on a specific bill or championing an issue in Congress or any other institution, then you can move to other elected officials. If you know they're not supporting, you can mobilize around it. And if you know they're undecided, then you have a better chance of moving them to your side. And then, of course, right now with the pandemic, a lot of the congressional office visits and just meeting with your elected official in general have been done virtually over Zoom. I think they've become even more accessible for a lot of folks. So I encourage everyone here to really meet with their congressional members. Again, whether you're a constituent, just really passionate about a specific issue. They usually have calls specifically for constituents on Fridays. And if you're a policy expert, I'm sure that you're already doing that advocacy and meeting with the senators and the House representatives on specific issues with coalition members. But the basics to keep in mind in terms of how to efficiently meet with your member of Congress is to, one, of course, schedule your meeting. And you can do so by putting a request on their website. Usually they have a form that you can fill out. You can also reach out to the scheduler and see if they're available to meet with you, if the member of Congress or any staff member is available. or you can simply call and ask for a meeting. But before you even go into that call or in-person visits, once COVID, we're fully recovered from the pandemic and we can resume traditional work, it's very important that you do your research. So learn about the member. Do they sit on any committees? What is their voting record? Did they make a public statement on the issue or not yet? Having all of that knowledge will help you frame how you speak on the issue and how to move them on that specific piece of legislation. It's also important to organize yourselves once you're presenting at the meeting. For instance, if we're speaking about coalition calls with many different policy experts, we usually have one leader, who we call the facilitator, speaking on behalf of the entire coalition, and then presenting the values, presenting the ask, presenting some context, addressing the problem, the solution. In addition to that, it also helps to have a constituent speak personally on how they're impacted, and also another person or a couple more people speak about a personal story that resonates and that relates to the issue at hand. And of course, make sure that the ask is very, very clear. After conducting the visit, which usually doesn't take longer than 30 minutes, it's also very important to go back and debrief with the either coalition members that you've joined for that meeting or any other community members and constituents that you were with, simply to make note of everything that was discussed during the meeting, but also to reflect on what was said, to see if there are any next steps that you need to take, any new strategies that you need to think of, and also ways to follow up with that particular elected official. And I really want to uplift this. Follow-up is probably the most important thing about this whole program. Consistency matters. Consistency over years sometimes. As we've seen with the Muslim ban, for instance, we're still advocating for a no-ban act, even after the repeal by the Biden administration. So some pieces of legislation or policy issues really do take a lot of years and a lot of commitment and consistency. And that goes, basically into following up, just on an individual level, even to begin with. So being consistent even with our interactions. So I say here again, follow up, very important. Send a thank you to basically show the elected official that you appreciate the time that they took to meet with you. Track the issue. If it's in Congress, you can track the bills on congress.gov. If it's on a state and local level, there are also other ways that you can track the issue and the bill. If there isn't a bill yet, you can introduce that idea. And I think, I wasn't sure if it was Brother Shakil or Ammar who brought this up, but it's very important that we take initiative. If there isn't a piece of legislation in Congress right now or in, on a local and state level, you can be that person that meets with an elected official and say, there's a gap that we need to fill. There's a problem that we need to fix. How can you do that? And then they will hopefully take initiative and draft a solution for it. It's also very important in terms of Congress to meet with your members of Congress when they're doing district work in recess. So I believe our senators just will be coming back from recess actually on Tuesday. So the past couple of weeks, we've been heavily engaging with senators, advocating on specific policies that we're spearheading, and making sure that our constituents and our network is really, are really sending out those emails, those action alerts, making those calls, and helping us advocate as well. And again, try again. Even, if you get a no the first time, meet again and make a different case, find a different angle, maybe go in with more coalition members, with more allies, restructure the way you're talking about your issue. Finally, I just want to talk about two more things that I think people also often forget when we speak about advocacy. So advocacy work is, yes, a lot of calling, a lot of emailing, action alerts that involve constituents, but also just having a consistent and a strongly founded relationship with your elected official. And I think this is even more important for local offices. Engage with them at community events. Know them on a more personal level. A lot of times, if we're speaking about local and state elected officials, they're probably your neighbor or, just down the road from you. They're not very far. And they really should understand the issues that the community is going through or is impacted by. So make sure that you are engaging at events, at town hall meetings. A lot of those are organized virtually at the moment, but it's still an opportunity to attend and make your voice heard. So when doing so, a lot of what I mentioned earlier also applies to this. So introduce yourself, make sure that you say that you're a constituent, make sure that you thank them, tell a personal story that can grab their attention, and then make that very clear, direct ask and follow up. In addition to town halls, I think everyone thinks it's proven that letter writing campaigns are also very effective. It's effective because not only are you making a demand or uplifting an issue, but you, in the letter that you send to that elected official, you are essentially educating them on that issue as a constituent, as a policymaker, as a community member. Again, it's also important to keep it short. Identify yourself, have focus points, have a very brief and concise argument. Choose up to 3, points for your argument. Don't give them a research paper, and make it personal. Make it as personal as possible to showcase the impact, and then ask for a response and give your contact information so that they can follow up with you. Another way letter writing is very helpful is that it shows up in numbers. So if you are mobilizing the community to send 1,000 letters to one office, imagine what that looks like if you're a staffer. If you're getting 1,000 emails or hundreds of emails, or you're getting actual letters in the mail, whatever it is that you're sending, it will show up as numbers, and that is also very impactful. In addition to letter writing, another avenue that you can use if you feel you can write and uplift an issue on a more on a larger scale, consider utilizing op-eds. So those are also very short, but then they not only educate and target the elected official, but also spread awareness for the larger collective, for the larger community. So you're mobilizing, you're organizing at this point. You're not just targeting one person, but just speaking about the issue in general. Similarly to all other tips that I mentioned, it's important to have a hook, to make that pitch, to share something that is strong, that is a staggering fact, or make an observation that might not be very obvious to everyone. Have your key messages very clear, end it on a strong point, a memorable point, show the impact, the human impact, the lived experiences of the people, I think are very, very important in everything that you do. And then know your audience as well. Who are you speaking to, and frame your message around that, and write it in proper form, of course. with that, I will end and say that numbers matter. So we spoke about consistency. We spoke about the different tools that you can use, from calling, emailing, sending letters, attending town hall meetings, community events, writing op-eds. All of those matter because it shows people power. Again, we spoke about people power earlier, and numbers really show people power. We can't have two people only advocating for an issue. We need the entire community. Two people can lead an initiative. Two people can start that spark and initiate that thought. But for us to actually have meaningful policy change, we will need all of us. And think about, I use this as an example all the time when we talk about advocacy, especially in Congress. Think of it this way. If you make 5 calls, it will put the policy issue on the agenda. If you make 7 calls in a day, it will keep your policy on the agenda. And if you make 10, it will definitely put your policy at the top of the agenda for the next staff meeting. All right, so I guess that wasn't my ending point. My ending point, I just want to leave you with a success story. And this was actually something that was brought to my attention by Ammar, so thank you for that. But we had a case in San Diego not too long ago, a few years ago, where a group of youth basically mobilized and organized towards having halal meats in this San Diego school district. And I think this is a very, very strong success story, because it really uplifts how impacted folks use their voice to address the issue. And I just want to highlight a couple of things from what I've learned about this specific campaign. So if we look at the org leading the effort, you'll find that they were successful because they connected the halal inclusivity issue in schools to the broader food justice issue. So by doing so, instead of isolating their cause to a Muslim-specific framework, they were able to mobilize not only the impacted, but everyone and anyone who believes children should have food on the table. I think this is a very, very important point, is how we not only advocate for our impacted community, but make sure that it reflects the values of the larger collective of the nation. How do we interact with allies and bring in more people from other communities to champion our cause as well. In addition to that, they focus on schools serving immigrant communities, many of whom are refugees in San Diego, with children who depended on school meals for their daily meals. So using that angle is very, very crucial, because it showcases the urgency that comes with advocating for low-income immigrant children whose basic religious and religious rights and nutrition needs aren't fulfilled at that particular school district. It's also important to note that influencing change in those low-income schools will likely open up more opportunities for other schools in that area, and maybe even spread to a state level, and then from that state level we can take it to a federal level. When interviewed, I have a couple of screenshots on here. So when interviewed, one of the youth leaders identified a couple of memorable, I'm forgetting my English, but identified a couple of important things for the way they advocated and organized around the issue. The first thing is that they identified an issue, which is important because we have a lot of issues impacting our community. But what is even more important is to come up with a solution, or at least suggest a solution. In their case, they provided the halal chicken option for students in that particular school district, which was feasible, easily implemented, and fixes the problem. They also emphasized that anyone can benefit from those meals, not just Muslim students. Again, thinking about how not only you are advocating for your own community members and impacted folks, but also how you can get how you can benefit the larger society, how you can benefit everyone while doing so. And then the last point is that, and this is something we often don't think about, but the campaign was also youth-led, and I find a lot of power in that. The people closer to the problem are oftentimes closer to the solution. So including impacted folks, in this case, students, and having them really take the charge and take the lead and meet with elected officials and share their voice is very, very important. And it's honestly probably one of the strongest tactics used for that campaign, because it's very hard to look at a child and say, I disagree with you. You know, you shouldn't have halal meals or get a meal in school. So highlighting the hardship, highlighting the lived experiences is very important with anything that you work on, anything you advocate for. So I will leave it at that, and just say you got this, you have an advantage. Again, whether you are a policy expert or a constituent, you do have the power because you are closer to the problem and you know the solution. And we'll open it up for Q&A, I believe. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much for that training, Joanna. There was a ton of actionable items for us to take, and that we can go, you know, even, well, today's a Saturday, so maybe not today, but this week we can go and, you know, just call our senators, contact the Congress, follow up with them, call the representatives, and kind of just start this process of, you know, making our voices heard and amplifying the Muslim community's voices as a whole. So thank you very much for that, Joanna.